Hi, I'm Terry O'Reilly, founder of OBP Australia, a service for overseas-born professionals looking to either get their first job in Australia or advance their career once they're established in their profession. Welcome to the podcast. Each episode, I'll be talking to an ex-OBP Australia client who's been successful in finding employment in Australia. We'll get to hear about their journey and what advice they have for job seekers. Rakesh is a ServiceNow certified CSA application/implementation engineer with more than 10 years experience in India and Australia in the healthcare and telco domains. He's witnessed the evolution of a variety of delivery methods, technologies and tools for improving the overall quality of service to the end subscriber. His forte is end-to-end service delivery and program management for large-scale projects in outsourced service delivery environments. I first met Rakesh in April 2020, after he'd been in Australia a couple of months. The first thing that struck me was his excellent communication skills, something that no doubt helped him secure work in his profession. Rakesh, welcome.
Nice to be here, Terry. How are you?
I'm really well. Now, you're currently working as a ServiceNow technical support engineer. Tell us a little bit about your job.
For sure. So I started working here about 9 months ago at this point, 9 or 10 months at this point. And I've been working as a technical support engineer at ServiceNow. My previous job sort of gave me a bit of an overview into ServiceNow, which kind of helped me secure this role. And it's along the same lines of my overseas experience, which is as an application support / services professional. So it's along the same lines, but just with ServiceNow, which is a great thing.
Right. So you said before this job you had some exposure to ServiceNow. Is that right?
Yes, because there was a stint. There was a brief stint with a company that I did, like a consulting firm for about 2 or 3 months, and that's where I got started. That's where I got certified with ServiceNow. Although I didn't continue to work there, it was beneficial in sort of landing this role.
Right. So do you think you would have got the job without that experience?
I think so at this point. Yes,
you would.
Yes,
That's
yeah.
interesting, because I'm always asked, how important is certification? How important is it to have prior experience with a particular platform or application? What was it you think that got you this job?
I think it was a combination of my previous experience and just the fact that the hiring manager, or the panel basically, knew that I had experience in a similar role before, just based on the way I answered certain questions. So going back to your question though about certifications, I am inclined to think that it's not as important as being able to demonstrate what the role requires of you.
Right. At interview or during the application demonstrating?
I would say both, because we've to be fair, I think everyone at some point has faced automated rejection emails,
Right.
because it's got a lot to do with the applicant tracking system and stuff like that. If your application needs to make its way past that stage, your resume needs to sort of outline that you're able to demonstrate those duties anyway. So I think that's the first sort of hurdle, and the second one would be obviously to demonstrate to the panel, because
Right.
I would think that's very important.
Yeah. So you've worked in health and telco domains. How important do you think the industry domain experience is, or not at all, for your profession?
In my profession, I would say it's really dependent on the actual role itself. So in some roles, they would require domain specific expertise over some others. So it really is very difficult to answer that question, because some roles will require that you have specific expertise over healthcare specific stuff, or telecom, or stuff like that. Whereas my role was more along troubleshooting, issues, kind of regardless of the technology. So there's a specific kind of expertise you might be able to gain, which doesn't bind you to a specific industry.
Right. So just go back to your healthcare experience for a moment. If an employer says healthcare sector experience preferred, and you don't have that, how would you suggest to somebody that they could persuade an employer to give them a chance without having that domain experience? Because I get a lot of clients who are facing these situations who don't have the domain experience. They feel like they could do the job, but it's very hard for them to know what it is about the domain that's a requirement. Why is it that you need that specific industry domain? What could somebody do you think, to improve their case?
I can speak for certain roles. Say, for instance, if they're support or services related, if they're implementation related, maybe what you can start doing is gain some information on specific healthcare terminologies that are part of the job description. So right. A lot of the time, a job description will actually outline what it is that they require you to do. They would prefer industry-specific experience, because that might possibly shorten your onboarding process. If you're familiar with certain terminology and stuff like that, it's, they don't have to train you additionally on that. So that might be one of the reasons someone would prefer that. But having said that, it's really up to how strong you fit the profile overall over just industry specific requirements. So I would say, if you're confident that the job description is a good fit for you, I would definitely read up on domain specific expertise if you can, and basically be right up front. If you get the call, be up front with them. Just say you have limited expertise, and it's 9 out of 10 times, if you fit the role, they will still interview you anyway. And I'm a firm believer, if they interview you, it's really up to you.
Yeah. I mean, that's a good advice to be upfront. I always find employers appreciate somebody being completely honest with them, and you can't bluff another professional peer anyway. So there's no point trying. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely. And it's just one of those things. I think we would expect the same of employers as well. So it's a two-way street, really. So I think they appreciate it.
Right. Now, you mentioned before that you were lucky enough to have some ServiceNow experience from your previous role. What if somebody was applying for, let's say, a Salesforce administrator role? They have certification but no experience. What would you suggest to somebody in that position?
So it would basically be of great benefit if they have any kind of CRM specific experience. So it may not now, obviously, assuming that the job requirement is specifically for a Salesforce administrator or developer or something like that. If they have any sort of experience in, for instance, maybe ServiceNow or, Microsoft Dynamics products or anything like that, that's similar to Salesforce, I would still, if you're certified, I would still ask them to consider applying to it, because it's just a different application, but the basic concepts for the most part will remain similar, if not the same. So it's just one of those things. If you have something that's very similar in your profile, if you have some CRM related or SaaS related experience, I would still encourage you to apply.
Right. Now, you mentioned before that your role is largely troubleshooting. Is that right?
Yes, it's a combination of troubleshooting and liaising with some internal teams. So if it's basically if it's something that you can resolve, you can do so by yourself. If not, you might have to liaise with development and um, raise problems and stuff like that. So it's a bit of communicating with clients and that sort of human touch. But at the same time, there's a lot of internal processes and such that you have to follow.
And you're responding to incident reports, is that right? Or
yes, that's right.
Your work comes through a constant feed, is that correct?
That is correct. So what happens is, you either have dashboards, and we have notifications set up. So whenever there's a new incident assigned to you, you get notified, and you have SLAs for different levels of incidents that are raised. So that's a different way of tackling each incident. So it's, yeah.
And is every day the same as that, or is there any project work? Is there any planning involved in your work, or is it all pretty much the same delivery?
I would pretty much say 80% of the time it's very similar, unless there's, like you said, if there's a project or two that you're involved in, you might have to fit that into your daily work schedule. But for the most part, the way incidents are assigned, the way work is assigned to you is very similar.
Right. And what about professional development? We know within the IT sector, things change so quickly. Mm-hmm. Is that formal or is it incidental? Are you learning from your colleagues? Do you have formal training? What's happening on the professional development front?
It would be a mixture of the two. So I always try to, when I know someone's good at a specific area of the application or something like that, I try to pick their brain to understand more about said specific area. And we also have, trainings, courses, certifications. There's actually webinars and such that we can attend. It's actually a mixture of everything. So
right.
There's plenty of potential to choose a specific direction and head that way if you need to.
Great. Now, we first met back in April 2020, I believe, and you arrived in February 2020. Is that right?
That's it. That's correct.
Yeah. So that's at the very start of COVID, pretty much. Tell us about those early days just after you arrived.
So it was a little overwhelming initially because this was the first time I'd ever left India. And I mean, I've lived with my family, so it's a very cultural thing where in India, for the most part, you just live with your family and, you get married, you have kids, you just basically, that's just a cultural thing. But, I had to leave sort of that comfort zone because, just based by the nature of the word, comfort zone was not very comfortable after a point because, I just wanted a new challenge. And obviously when I had the opportunity, I applied for residence and I got it. And I'm not a person who generally, plans everything meticulously. I usually trust my gut when it comes to stuff like this. So the first couple of months I was really questioning my gut because, 2 weeks, I think, after I arrived here, everything shut down. And the first 2 weeks were actually fun because I don't know, for some reason I had the perspective of a traveler because it was like, oh, these are all new places, this beach, that museum, this other zoo or whatever. It was just a lot of fun to see all these places. And 2 weeks later, everything gets shut down. So it was a very, very intense time because, none of us had ever experienced anything like this before. And now I'm far away from home in a new country trying to build when, there were actually a few layoffs and such, happening at the time, which was kind of intimidating.
So that's a huge step. I mean, you're leaving your family, home environment, you're in a new country. You've got COVID, which has put everybody into lockdown. Did you have anybody here? Did you have any
No,
friends or family?
no, I
Wow.
actually didn't know anyone in Australia. I do have a couple of friends, but safe to say they're really far away. So
Mm.
one of my friends is in Perth. So obviously, it's a 5 hour flight away.
Yeah, and
So
what city are you in, just for our listeners?
Sydney.
So you're in Sydney. All right, big
Yeah.
city. So tell us about your efforts to find your first job, given the situation, and also what you did to try and find that first job.
So my view of it was, well, there's got to be work in some form or another. My my initial instinct was not to find a job in, not just sitting around and waiting to find a job in IT or whatever. It was just, let's just keep yourself, occupied until you're able to find the time to, apply to certain jobs and stuff like that. And obviously, like almost every immigrant does, it was just one of those things where I would deliver food on Uber Eats during the day, sometimes at night. Well, a couple of hours during the night, and the remainder of the time, maybe 3, 4 hours during the day, I would use for job search. But it was rather blind and directionless. I would just look at, I don't know, I would just look at any websites like Seek or LinkedIn or wherever there was an opening. I would just post my resume there,
Right.
and consequently, it led me nowhere at that point. And there was one such job application that I made on LinkedIn, which I sort of highlighted it was a customer service role, which I worked in for a little over a year, I'd say. It was a good company. It was the boss that I worked for was great, so it was a good environment, which is why I ended up staying for more than a year. Which is, even though it wasn't my ideal role, it was just a great work environment. I ended
And
up
customer
finding.
service roles are really good for that. That conversation in a new country where you're learning slang, you're meeting lots of people and you're solving problems.
Absolutely.
Sometimes people find survival jobs and there's not much talking involved, which is problematic. So if you can get a customer service job, that's great. Sorry, you were going to say?
No, I was just I think that was part of what I was going to say anyway, because it gives you that little push that you need, just the fact that you're going to be able to speak to these people. You're just going to be on the lookout for certain intricacies, maybe just like you mentioned, slang, something that's uniquely cultural, and trying to learn from it basically. So it was very helpful for me.
Did you have a time frame? I mean, did you say, okay, I'm going to do this survival job for 6 months, 3 months, whatever? Or were you just playing it by ear?
I started delivering for Uber Eats, which was the first survival job, which was, I think, about 3 weeks after coming here, because that's how much time it takes for them to verify your stuff. Like once you apply for it, I started doing it right away because it was just one of those things where um, I don't like sitting idle. I'd rather make use of that time maybe to get to know the neighborhood and stuff like that, which actually helped me a great deal because a lot of the area around which I live, I currently know. So most of
Right.
Western Sydney, I'm very well versed with, which is a big area. Well, Sydney's a big city, but most of the western suburbs I'm still good with, and that gave me the confidence that I needed initially, because like I said, so it was a city that's really far removed from anything culturally or visually that I was used to.
Right. And you said initially you just posted your resume on Seek. How did that job seeking approach change over time? What did you do to actually get interviews?
So it was I think 2 or 3 months into my first job, where I realized that, I should actually start looking for work in IT, not because there was anything wrong with the job, just the fact that, I would be able to contribute much better to something that's closer to what I did back home. So I I started applying for jobs initially, just like I said, just click the apply button, upload my resume, just write a generic cover letter. And obviously it was leading me nowhere. So I needed a change in approach. I tried to go to a few networking events, at least the ones that were still functional, because most of it was through Zoom because of lockdowns and such.
Not quite the same, is it, networking via Zoom?
No, it's not. I mean, as much as it's helpful than to not do anything at all, it's still that human touch is essential. Like when you look someone in the eye, you have a conversation with them. There's a what do you call it? There's a specific for the lack of a better word, energy exchange that happens when you talk to someone. That's definitely missing in the sort of virtual space. But anyway, I tried to attend these events. I tried to attend the online ones, and I think one of the events was I think it was one of Vinesh's events.
Yep.
Where I came across you.
Yep.
And I found it to be intriguing enough to have a chat with you. And that's when we spoke the first time. It was just before I found my my first job. I think after we spoke, I got an offer maybe a couple of weeks later or something like that. It was very close to that. So which is why it escaped me for a few months. And then later on, I remembered, I'd spoken to this gentleman before. Let me see if I still have his number. So I pulled out your number, I gave you a call, and the first conversation we had, you'd made it pretty clear that this is, it was a systematic sort of approach. And I had attended one of those virtual events where I think you presented for a few minutes, maybe for 10 or 15 minutes. I don't remember exactly what you presented, but you gave a sort of brief overview of how your approach is to the industry. And I thought that was it was simple, but not easy. Right. At least I couldn't figure it out on my own, which is why I had to eventually end up seeking your services. But it was just one of those things where I felt like it should have been common sense, but it wasn't. There's a specific kind of approach to job seeking that's required over here. I don't have a benchmark. I don't know if it works in other countries the same way, but it's a very specific market and something that needs to be kept in mind before you apply for jobs.
Yeah, I think that simple but not easy is a really good way of explaining the whole predicament of trying to find work in Australia as a recently arrived immigrant. So can you nail anything down of all the things that we did together and the approaches and so on? Is there anything that you think was critical in your applications or your approach to finding work? Because everybody's different. So one of the purposes of me talking to different people is that people get to hear what worked for somebody and what worked for somebody else, perhaps. So in your situation, can you pull out one or two things that you think were really useful?
Sure. So I think one of the things that you highlighted, and I think that was more beneficial. That's when I sort of got it. It was, well, the key word was demonstrate. It was just based on every job application. When I spoke to you for the first time, you were like, okay, you feel like you can apply for this job. Sure. But let's have a look at your resume and, why is it different? And I'm like, well, it's not different. It's the same thing. Well, okay. That it's the same thing, but the job requirements state something specific. And we have to have the ability to demonstrate to someone who is not possibly, in most cases, is not a technical person, to understand that you are the right fit for this job. So we need to make points and we need to give examples of just to demonstrate how you fit into this position. And that to me was sort of like my eureka moment where,
Right.
okay, so now it makes sense. And yeah, that was one specific thing that I thought was an eye opener. It sort of changed the way I thought about it.
And were most of your jobs applications through LinkedIn, directly with a company, or via Seek or Indeed or other job sites?
It was a mixture of a few different things. So a couple of jobs I applied directly to the company using, you know, a couple of sort of methods that we went over, and I think two or three of those, not a lot, two or three of those were sort of like generic applications on Seek. But the LinkedIn ones, you know, I made sure to sort of clean up my profile on LinkedIn to reflect everything that was current and sort of, you know, anything that was inconsistent or anything that was sort of in fancy font or anything that was unnecessary, I sort of took out.
So, yeah. And how did you get around the issue of not having any local experience, or was that not an issue for you?
You know, that's a good question, because I do not know if it was or not, in the sense that the first job that I worked for was a customer service role, and they considered the fact that, you know, I was suitable for the job, and they you know, didn't mind that I didn't have local experience. So if you ask for my opinion, I don't know if it's such a big requirement, but there might be people who've had an entirely different experience than me. So I don't think it was a big problem for me. That being said, I do get at least one job offer, or like some recruiter trying to contact me on LinkedIn at least once a week now. So maybe, you know, maybe ignorance is bliss, I guess. So maybe I had no idea.
Yeah. Look, it certainly helps having local experience, but it's again, it's not a barrier, certainly not for everybody. People get work, as you have done, without local experience, and thousands of people do. So yeah, it's useful to hear what your experience of that was. What about the job interview? What was your first experience of a job interview, and was that similar to what you expected or different?
It was quite similar to what I was used to in India, except for it was a lot more, I don't know if this is the right word, but it was a lot more casual. I was expecting it to be a lot more serious than what it was. Maybe it has something to do with the personality of the person who's trying to interview as well, but it was very relaxed. I mean, I do not remember feeling nervous at all, because, you know, probably because I'm a person who likes to talk a lot, but it's also because of the fact that it was for something that was as serious as a job interview, it was very relaxing. It wasn't, you know, it wasn't three people looking at you while you're trying to answer a question. It was very laid back, which I thought was, you know, it was definitely much better than I expected it to be.
Right. So that's fairly common feedback. Do you think that casual nature extends across all things in the culture, or was it just in the interview? I mean, your work environment now, is it more casual than what you had been used to in India?
Yes, I would say so. Because overall, I think there's a bit of a casual sort of environment, and casual when it comes to interactions, not when it comes to work, because when it comes to work, it's serious. That's probably the same everywhere around the world. But when it comes to, you know, daily interactions and such, people are just much nicer. So I feel like, not that, people weren't nice back home. It's just a different kind of
Different, yeah.
environment, I would say.
Yeah. Any other significant cultural differences you'd like to point out? I'm just thinking there may be people listening who are not in the country, and this sort of information is really helpful. Sometimes people have never been here, as you had never been here yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So just knowing how people interact can be a useful insight.
Absolutely. I would say the sense of humor. I
Right.
mean, people have a good sense of humor here. It was just, it wasn't shocking to me because I had done some research on Australia, and it wasn't, I wasn't shocked to see that most people have a good sense of humor, but it was very important too, because, if you're planning to move to Australia and you've never been here before, try to read up as much as possible. Maybe try to, I mean, you don't have to read up on slang and stuff like that. I mean, you don't have to say it, but it would help to know what something means. So, try to read up as much as possible. Try to read about the history of the country and such.
Yep.
It's, there's a lot of history to this country, which is very intriguing. So there's a lot to learn.
So you said you did a little bit of research before you came.
Yep.
How did that prior knowledge compare with the reality when you arrived?
It wasn't, I mean, that's an excellent question. I don't know if able to I'm able to elaborate on that, but I'll try my best. So what I noticed was people over here generally live life in terms of, you have a certain time window when you're working, right? Maybe it's 7 to 4, maybe it's 8 to 5, whatever your time window is. After that, they switch off from work, which is, I think, a very refreshing attitude, which is something that, at least in the places I worked for, it wasn't the norm. Let me put it that way. Not all the companies, just a couple of companies that I worked for, it wasn't the norm. So people have those 9 hours or 8 hours to dedicate to work. And after that, they're just away from work, which is a very healthy attitude, I think. And that's, I'd read that it was Australia and New Zealand are 2 countries in the world that have a good work-life balance. And I was sort of skeptical about that. But when I came here, I realized that it is true. It's just, people have a much healthier attitude towards work.
Right. And thinking about people who are about to come to Australia, is there anything people could do before they emigrate to be better prepared for when they arrive? Either for job seeking or for life in general in Australia?
I would say your mindset needs to be very different from what you're used to in your home country, because wherever you are, obviously we all sometimes come from different environments, so it might not be similar to what I had. I was very comfortable. 9 out of 10 of you probably are very comfortable in your current country. But what I would say is have a good mindset, in the sense that this is a new country. No one knows you. So you will have to start from scratch. So if no one knows you, it's about working up to a certain level where, you're back to a certain level of whatever it was corporate wise that you were at. And that might take time. Give yourself maybe a year, or maybe even a couple of years. If you're coming with family, maybe give yourself a couple of years until sort of the dust settles, so to speak. Because, like I said, it's a new environment. No one knows you. You have no history in this country. So treat it as a blank slate, as opposed to, I was, so-and-so designation in my country. So, I need to get a role that aligns exactly to that. I think it's, you know, people may set themselves up to disappointment if you immediately expect the job market to just open up and, just
Right.
yeah, offer you those jobs. But yeah, I think it's more of a mindset thing. So long
Right.
answer.
I think that the no one knows you is a really interesting way to put it, because I often see people who come, even within the resume itself, there's an assumption that people know how much responsibility was attached to a role.
Mhm.
They expect people to have to assume.
Yeah,
And
I think
particularly,
that's a common. Yeah, I
yeah,
agree.
particularly if you have a lot of experience, sometimes the more experience you have, the harder it is, because I get this feeling that people feel like they're not recognized, and
Mhm.
that's understandable, that you may have had quite a glorious career overseas, but you get here and it's like nobody knows what you've done. And that's really hard to convey in a written document,
Absolutely.
and sometimes hard to convey in an interview as well. And that can be frustrating for people, because all that hard work that they have done previously
Mhm.
seems to go unrecognized in the new country.
True. And I think, if you, like you said, if you expect everyone to know what it is, exactly what it is you've done, it might open you might open yourself up to disappointment that way, because
Mm.
it's a slow process. You have to be patient. I think patience is key, and not being, disheartened by, if you have the odd rejection and stuff like that. That happens, and that's going to happen everywhere in the world. If you leave your comfort zone and go somewhere else, you're going to have rejections. That's just part of life, and it's not the end of the world. In fact, that's one step closer to you doing something right.
What did you do to help with that, feeling of frustration and being disheartened from rejection? Was there anything that you did that helped you get by and keep you positive, I guess?
Well, the first couple of months were difficult because, until I found the customer service job, which was, I think, the second month, actually a little over 2 months. But until then, what I would do is just basically try to keep myself busy, and if it was becoming too much, like, if it was becoming physically stressful, or whatever else, I would just take a day off and just relax, try to unwind, and do my best to keep my spirits up, because like I said before, I didn't have family here, I didn't have, any friends here, and it was really difficult. Try to stay in touch with my friends and family and stuff back home, but it's just one of those things. I think I had this mindset for a very long time. Whenever I had the odd rejection and stuff like that, we all have those days where, we feel like, well, is this even worth it, right? And that's a perfectly normal feeling to have.
Hmm.
But try your best to sort of push yourself through it, because at the other end of that, sometimes, you have that break that you were least expecting.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Well, congratulations on finding work in your profession, making that transition, and yeah, it's really commendable what you've done. It's not easy, no matter how quickly people find work, and the longer it takes, the harder it gets, of course. So it's well done, and thanks for joining us today, Rakesh.
Thank you so much, Terry. Thanks for giving me this opportunity. And yeah, I mean, it's just one of those things. I think patience is key. Everyone, I think, over here, if you put in the effort, whether it's today or tomorrow, maybe it's 6 months later, you will get, your reward. So, it's just a matter of patience, I would say.
Right. Yeah. I really appreciate your time and willingness to share your experiences, and I'm sure your insights are useful for current job seekers. So, all the best and keep in touch.
Thank you, Terry.
OBP Australia provides guidance and support with job applications and approaching employers, industry awareness, interview coaching, and language and communication. You'll also be introduced to your professional peers already working in Australia, so you can get the lowdown on what's happening in your industry or profession. If you're looking for guidance and support to find your next job, email me at terry@obpaustralia.com.au. Let's talk.